So the first question was about the absolute nothingness. So here is my take on it. As always, I'm talking about my personal interpretation, my personal opinion. Philosophically speaking, as Abdul Baha tells us, there is no such thing as absolute nothingness. Because what we observe in the world is always something. We have a hierarchy of creation, starting from matter and then to plants, then to animals, then to humans, and in the spiritual world, then to other beings, angels, or whoever they are. But no matter what we investigate, there is no such thing as absolute nothingness, and therefore, when the Bible talks about creation from nothing, ex nihilo, we interpret this, that this particular nothing was not in fact absolute nothingness, but was the potentiality of everything. Hence, there was another question about zero in mathematics. I'm not an expert in mathematics, Todd, but my understanding was that zero was invented by Indians, and the idea of zero, as well as the idea of emptiness in Buddhism, shunyata, does not mean absolute nothingness. And Buddhists are not those people who want to commit spiritual suicide, through a lot of effort, trying hard to annihilate themselves spiritually, not only physically, but spiritually. No, by shunyata, by emptiness, by zero, they mean, they may mean different things, but basically, it is either the potentiality of being or spirituality when you empty your own ego, you empty your own soul in order to be able to reflect the spiritual rays that come from Baha'u'llah in the Baha'i sense, in the Baha'i interpretation, etc. So again, philosophically speaking, absolute nothingness does not exist. But Baha'u'llah uses the term absolute nothingness in a different sense, not as a philosophical term, but as a metaphor for emptying your mind and your soul, for becoming so humble as to think of yourself as being like absolute nothingness in the face of God, who is the absolute presence. So mystically speaking, I think the expression absolute nothingness is used in this sense. But again, it is not absolute nothingness that actually does not exist. Let me connect our discussion of nothingness with our discussion of creation, emanation, and manifestation. Because the discussion of nothingness is directly related to those terms, theologically speaking. Now, when you take those three terms, creation, emanation, manifestation, I think the most important term theologically is the term creation. Because the term creation is defining the relationship between God and creatures. And in the history of theology, by the way, Seraphim, this topic was discussed by George Florovsky, the famous Russian theologian, when he distinguished between generation and creation. So generation is when you produce something out of your nature. For example, when a mother gives birth to a child, the child is not the same as the mother, but the child has the same nature as the mother. Both are human. Creation is producing something not from your nature, but from your will. So Abdul Baha tells that creation is like the writer who writes a novel. The novel, the result, is not of the same nature as the writer. So therefore, the idea of creation as producing from will is of utmost importance, not only for Baha'is, but for all monotheists. Because if you believe that creation is like generation and the world is of the same nature as God, then you already step into the domain of pantheism or different versions of pantheism, like panentheism, etc. So again, creation is the central term. Then we get from creation to this difference, emanation and manifestation. So the term emanation does come from Plotinus. I insist, not Plotinus. Plotinus or Plotinus, he does introduce this term, but he introduces this term into his own neo-Platonic. Actually, the term was invented in the 19th century by 19th century scholars. But for him, it was Platonism. He was just developing the school of Platonism. So he introduces the term emanation in his own philosophical system. And from Plotinus, this idea penetrates to classical Muslim philosophy, to Ibn Sina especially. And Abdul Baha also uses this term to distinguish between creation from absolute nothing, like what some Christians affirm, that there was some moment when God simply was alone and God created the whole of creation from nothing. Abdul Baha uses the term emanation to distinguish this kind of view from the view that creation never has any starting point in time, or generally speaking, that the universe or creation as a whole always existed, will ever exist, because the moment it does not exist, God stops to be God, formally speaking. So therefore, emanation is simply, in Baha'i terms, is continuous and infinite creation. As Baha'u'llah says, creation has a beginning that has no beginning, and will have an end that will have no end. Creation, emanation, and manifestation. And since we don't have much time, let me just come to the second meaning of emanation. So the first meaning of the term emanation is its relationship to creation, the first meaning. And then the second meaning of emanation is relationship to manifestation. So we have two pairs, emanation as creation and emanation versus manifestation. And although we have the same word, it is used in in two different meanings. So that's why sometimes it is getting confusing. Again, this is my personal take on it. But as a person who was trained in philosophy and who was heavily influenced by Anglo-American philosophy, and by the idea that you cannot talk about metaphysical issues which are beyond human perception and understanding. So when it comes to those kind of theological issues, I always wanted to make connection between the terms and our everyday reality. So when we talk about God creating something, we really have no idea what we are talking about, because God is beyond our experience, the whole of creation is beyond our experience, and we simply create some mental constructs we are comfortable with. Now, the same applies, I think, to the idea of the manifestation. Every religion has its own word or its own term for this person who is the founder and who has some special qualities, who is different from ordinary human beings. Messenger of God, avatar, Buddha, Tirthankara, etc. So the meaning is the same, is that this person have different, higher abilities than ordinary people. So he creates a religion, and we become part of his religion. And I think, well, first of all, this is a historical fact. And that's where I connect this to our perceived reality. We have no idea how God created the world, but we can see that there are in history some people who have extraordinary abilities. And it's difficult to create your own religion, even to create a religion that would be successful for thousands of years. So since this is a historical fact, we have to provide a conceptual framework to understand this fact. And that's what Abdul Baha does by distinguishing between emanation and manifestation. So if we take those two terms in light of the difference between ordinary human beings and the founders of religion, I think those two terms are easily understood and can be applied to our experience. So ordinary people are created by emanation. And Abdul Baha gives a metaphorical description of what this means. It means God, as the writer, creates characters in the novel. And manifestation, which is a different kind of creation, and Baha'u'llah gives another metaphor, the seed that grows into the tree. So the tree is not the seed, and at the same time, the tree is the actualized seed. So for me, what it says is quite simple, is that Baha'u'llah somehow has the ability or has a direct access to the Holy Spirit. And in certain measure that is inaccessible to ordinary humans.